So here are some new properties and theorems that we're going to talk through today in order to use it for our proofs. The first are properties of congruence. So these should look similar to some of the properties of equality. The difference between equality and congruence is that equality has to do with numbers. So 3 equals 3 or x equals 5, that's equality. Congruence has to do with figures. So when figures are the same size, they're congruent. So the first is the reflexive property of congruence. That just means that a figure is congruent to itself. That one, y'all are going to forget. You're not going to remember. It's going to seem too obvious, and then it's going to come up in proofs all the time. The second is the symmetric property of congruence. That says I can flip the order of my two statements, and it's still congruent. So if one's congruent to 2, then angle 2 is congruent to angle 1. Finally is the transitive property. This says that if two things are congruent to the same thing, then they're also congruent to each other. So for the example, it uses lines. So if two lines are congruent to RS, then they're both congruent to each other. The next one has to do with supplementary angles. Remember, supplementary angles add together to equal 180 degrees. So the first says if two angles form a linear pair, then they're supplementary. Linear pairs look like this. Like they're a line, but they have like an angle coming through them. So if angle A and angle B form a line, when you put them side by side, then they're supplementary. So having a line like this means that angle A, or the measure of angle A plus the measure of angle B, equals 180. That's the linear pair theorem. The congruent supplements theorem says that if two angles are supplementary to the same angle, then they're congruent. So if I know that angle 1 and angle 2 are supplementary, and I know that angle 2 and angle 3 are supplementary, then because they're both supplementary to angle 2, then angle 3 and angle 1 have to be congruent because they both add to the same number to equal 180. Finally, we're going to look at some complementary theorems. For the first, all right angles are congruent. They're all 90 degrees. If you know they're right angles, then you know they're congruent. The second is just like the supplementary angle theorem. It just has to do with complementary angles. And remember, complementary angles add to 90 degrees. Supplementary add to 180. Complementary add to 90. So if 1 and 2 are complementary to each other and 2 and 3 are complementary, notice that they're both complementary to 2, then angle 1 is congruent to angle 3. This should all be built on some previous angle knowledge that you have. If you are feeling a little shaky with your supplementary and complementary emails, send me an email. We can go over some stuff. We can review those facts so that as you build on those proofs, they become more familiar.